Hi, welcome back to Future Fast. And like always, we have another amazing guest with us today. And before I bring the guest on to you, thank you so much for following Future Fast. And I hope you're enjoying the ride as much as I do. And jumping right in, we have Aubrey de Grey. Uh, he's the chairperson for LEV Foundation. LEV is basically uh, longevity escape velocity. So, as much as uh, curious you are about what is this, so we'll dive in and bring Aubrey right into the conversation. Aubrey, welcome to Future Fast, and thank you so much for making time to be with us here.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So, Aubrey, your journey has been as a research associate research scientist to the pretty much the one of the significant voices on life extension. So, can you please take us through your journey before we get into conversation on LEV?
Sure, yeah. So I was actually not a biologist originally. I was originally a computer scientist. I did my undergraduate degree in the 1980s in computer science, and for 6 or 7 years, I worked in artificial intelligence research. And the reason I did so was because I had discovered when I was like 15 that I was a good programmer. And I decided that the best way for me to use that skill was to try to solve a big humanitarian problem. And the problem I chose to work on was the problem of work. The fact that people have to spend so much of their time doing stuff that they wouldn't do unless they were being paid for it. So, of course, the way to do that is to develop automation and artificial intelligence, which, of course, we are now seeing many years later, coming very rapidly. But back then, the goal was just the same. So it was during that time that I met and married a biologist who's a lot older than me. She was already a full professor at the University of California, San Diego, and she was actually in England, where I was living then, on sabbatical. And through her, well, first of all, I learned a lot of biology by accident, over the dinner table, but also I began to discover very gradually that she just wasn't interested in aging. And indeed, it wasn't just her, that, all the other biologists I was meeting felt the same way. And I thought, this is crazy. What's going on? I mean, aging is obviously by far the world's most important problem, the thing that causes by far the most suffering. And I was only working on artificial intelligence because I thought, well, that's what I'm good at. And people who are good at biology will be doing the other stuff. So when I found out that that wasn't true, I decided to switch fields. This is in the mid 90s. And ever since then, I've been working on the biology of aging. After I'd been working in it for about 5 years or so, I had, I guess, what can be thought of as my major big eureka moment in terms of my contribution to the field, which was the realization of how to go about addressing aging and bringing aging under comprehensive medical control. And I guess we'll talk about that as we go forward during this. But so I mean, I was definitely helped back then by the fact that I had an unusual background for a biologist, that I did not have a career in biology from the beginning. It helped me to be, if you like, not so encumbered by the conventional wisdom of the field and to look at the problem in a different way.
Right. And today it looks very natural to see AI or an expert in artificial intelligence working with biology. But back then, how was that? I mean, it didn't seem very organic, right?
That's completely right. Yes, there was no real relationship between the two. I mean, the during that time, I actually had a job that was in bioinformatics, so combining computing with biology, but very much not in artificial intelligence. It was
Correct.
quite a tedious, boring job, actually. In fact, the only reason I had it was because it was very undemanding and it gave me lots of spare time to do my research. But yeah, the things have very much changed. In fact, back then, occasionally people would go, who'd start out in biology and get trained in how to write software in order to do, bioinformatics, but it was very rare to go the other direction.
Well, you seem like a person who's got very clear clarity in terms of even taking up a boring job because it gives you time to do what you like to do. So, considering this, what kind of learning you seem to have gone through over a period of time, uh, and how do you see that helping you today with your
It
LAV
doesn't make,
job?
yeah, it doesn't make so much of a difference today, actually. Since I've been around and, a prominent figure in the field for a long time, most of my work today is not really in the area of having new big ideas and changing the direction of the field or anything. I mean, of course, I do oversee a bunch of people who work on the biology of aging at the bench, but I I spend most of my time really doing public speaking and interviews like this and so on, in order to educate humanity, the society in general, and to raise people's sights, to get people to realise that aging is not as inevitable as we used to think it was. You have gone muted.
My bad. So, how do you see uh, today as a leader? How do you see your efforts translating to where you want to be from the point of time? You started. You were probably one of the earliest to start working on this.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, I wasn't actually one of the earliest. There are always predecessors to anybody. But certainly things are very, very different now than what they were back then. Back then, there were very few people, experts in the field, who were really thinking about how to deal with aging. Almost everybody was focused on just trying to understand aging better. And honestly, there's still a bit too much of that, a bit too much, feeling that doing something to actually postpone aging is kind of too difficult and we're not going to do it for a while yet. I think that's not really justifiable anymore. However, yeah, I mean, things were very different. Now, we've come a long way, and of course, even the private sector is getting very heavily involved with lots and lots of companies working in this space, lots and lots of investment. So, things are definitely moving faster. And if I look and ask whether things have moved as rapidly as I wanted, I mean, of course, I could never say that because every day there's still 110,000 people dying of aging, and I would much prefer that were over already. But on the other hand, I guess I'm a glass half full kind of person, so I guess I feel reasonably you know, gratified that the progress that has been made is, better than it might have been. I think I've made a difference.
Right. Well, one side is it is true that aging is continuing to kill, but we also have huge populations, even before they get to what is considered as aged, are continuing to pass out. So we still have whole lot of issues, and there is still a lot of unpredictable death. Right? I mean, very hale, healthy person dies. I mean, we just had recently one of the celebrity fitness guru actually died. So, h-
Yeah,
how
this
do you
happens.
bridge this?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're completely right. There are plenty of people still dying in earlier in life. Um, But if we look at the average longevity in different countries
Yeah.
around the world, then, if we look at the overall longevity of the world in total, it's now something like 73, 74. So it's No, and that's including all of the poor countries in the world. If you look
Right.
at each country individually, even if you go to sub-Saharan Africa, then there isn't a single country anymore that has an average lifespan lower than 50. So even there, we've made a huge amount of progress in
Yes.
minimizing the amount of, especially infant mortality. The reason why life expectancy 100 years ago, even in the wealthiest countries in the world, was less than it is in any country in the world now, that was because of infant mortality. And so we can pat ourselves on the back to a large extent for having got as far as we have. Certainly, there's further to go, but the poorer countries in the world are catching up.
But do you somewhere feel is that why the case for longevity is not getting as much backing because we still have a whole lot of other things scoring better points? So
It could be. It could be. I mean, certainly there is a tendency to say, oh, let's help the disadvantaged before we start helping the people who are already doing relatively well. But at the end of the day, the logic of that is very fragile because the thing about getting to old age is that the health problems of late life are chronic and progressive, which means that one endures a large number of years of poor quality life and ill health and suffering, whereas people who die at an earlier age, they tend to die suddenly. Anything that kills you either kills you quickly or it doesn't kill you at all and you recover.
yeah, that's quite a complexity here, right? See, I'm in India, and our government is mostly on the above 50 side, if I can say that. But our prime minister himself is 73, I think. And always the argument is that we are a young country because less than 50% of our population is, or near 50% of our population is below 35 years old. So they refer to us as a young India, a young country, which is fair, but nearly 15 to 17% of our population is over 65, which is almost nearing American population, if you see that, or most of European population, if you look at that, and which is a significantly large senior population. But the thought, every argument, every offering, or every policy is so focused at young, and uh, so it's almost like they are not seeing a future with aged. And even in India, official lifespan is near 77, and urban lifespan is much higher. And personally, I know a lot of people who are well above 80, and there is some kind of apathy towards this. So, how do you address that, or is that part of your? I mean, do you think about that?
Sure, I do, absolutely. Because the only way that I can really communicate to the wider world, to the general public, to society, is by having at least some idea of where their heads are in the first place, right? So I want to really give two answers to what you just said. First of all, a country like India has the specific issue that you are improving very rapidly in terms of the proportion of people who reach old age. Not long ago, like 20 years ago, the numbers that you just quoted were very, very different, right? Whereas in the West, we reached the kind of point that you were at 20 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, and so there's been longer to adjust to this demographic, even though
Correct.
it's. But the other thing applies really just as much to the West as it does to India or a country in India's position, which is that people kind of don't want to think about aging. People have had to kind of put aging out of their minds for, since the beginning of civilization, because there's nothing we could do about it. If you live long enough and you don't get eaten by a lion or, die of tuberculosis or whatever, then you're going to suffer aging at a reasonably predictable age. And people really don't want to think about that because it's so horrible. So they find ways to put it out of their minds and focus on things that they think they can actually do something about. And that made perfect sense until recently, until basically I came along and figured out a good plan for how to bring aging under medical control. That plan still has some way to go to be fully implemented, of course, but it's standing the test of time, and progress is being made all the time. And the faster we go, the sooner we'll start saving a lot of lives that way.
Well, how do you connect your efforts with Viento? Viento, what's Viento? Maybe a quick introduction to our listeners and audience.
Yeah, Viento is actually honestly a bit of a sideline for me these days because I honestly don't have enough time to spend on it. But it arises from an idea I had about 5 years ago that relates a couple of areas that I don't work in, but I have, reasonably read about. One of them is the application of machine learning, artificial intelligence, to what are called chaotic systems, of which, of course, the weather is one. Systems which exhibit this thing called the butterfly effect, where a very small perturbance can have big effects later on. Um, and basically, people figured out how to predict the behavior of chaotic systems, not forever, because by definition, a chaotic system can't be predicted forever, but for a lot longer, like many times longer than what people were able to do before. And the other big thing that happened was the launching of some satellites that have resulted in very, very much finer granularity of real-time measurement of the weather worldwide, of the speed and direction of the wind at many different altitudes, for example. And I realized that we might be able to put these two things together and come up with ways to manipulate the weather in a way that we haven't been able to do in the past because we haven't been able to build the machinery. We may now be just about within range of the point where things that are human engineerable, can actually alter the weather in a predictable way 2 weeks into the future, in such a way that, for example, you can stop a hurricane from making landfall, or you can
That
prevent.
that would be significant. So far, I think it's partially cloud seeding and such.
Yeah, I mean, the things that we can do right now are very, very much more primitive, and they honestly don't do much. But if you can do anything like I just described, then maybe there's a chance of having much bigger impact. And of course, in the next few decades, as we gradually bring climate change under control, we hope, you know, obviously the sooner we do that, the better with carbon capture and such like. But in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of suffering caused by the climate change that's already happening. And most of that is caused by extreme weather events of one kind or another, whether it's hurricanes or monsoons or heat waves or droughts. And it might be possible to alleviate these using techniques of the sort I just described.
Well, Aubrey, aging, health, or even weather, all these things are traditionally, historically been looked at as something natural, or even a divine play, if you will, right? And these are the things you're trying to take on head on. So, what is the trigger for it? Is there a trigger for this?
I don't know. Maybe I just have a high opinion of myself. I mean, honestly, I've always wanted, even since I was a young kid, I've always wanted to do my utmost in life to make a difference to the world, to address the most difficult problems facing humanity. And I've been extremely privileged to have been able to get into one of those things, the biology of aging, and make a significant contribution, which I'm, of course, continuing to do my best to do. But honestly, most people, there are plenty of other people in the world who could be doing what I'm doing, but who haven't tried. And I also, of course, did get very lucky early on. I met the right people at the right time and so on. So, I'm not saying anyone should really try to follow the same kind of career trajectory that I did. But at the end of the day, all technological progress depends on people who are unreasonably confident, like me.
Do you want to recount or name people who have helped you becoming the person that you are today?
Well, it's actually pretty much the obvious people. I mean, my mother certainly, made me enjoy learning. That was probably the single thing that helped me in my formative years. Um, And certainly my ex-wife, Adelaide, that I mentioned earlier, obviously accidentally taught me a lot of biology and helped me get going as a biologist. And there are very few other people, but yeah, I mean, it's the usual thing, really. Just like, I found my way with the help of people around me.
Do you want to talk about some books or videos or podcasts or documentaries, whatever that you follow? Share it perhaps with our audience and listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I get most of my information, scientific information, from my colleagues because I see them a fair amount at conferences and so on. There are a few very good news outlets these days, though, in the biology of aging, in the longevity field. There's one called lifespan.io, which is based in New York, and which is a very good general audience source written for people for non-specialists. There's another one called Longevity Technology, which is based out of the UK and which is mostly focused on the private sector. And then there's a newsletter, a kind of blog called Fight Aging, which has been going for a long, long time, since well before there was a private sector at all in the longevity space, which is written by a very knowledgeable guy, has new things every day or two, very, very recommended.
Wonderful. And for the audience and listeners, we also have the links of Aubrey and some of the things that he follows. So please do look them up and follow what they're doing. And do come back for our conversation as we dive into LEV. And for those of you who have not yet subscribed to Future Past, this is the time to click on the subscription button. All right. And thank you once again. Enjoy the ride and come back soon.